Hello, dear listener. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. I'm so delighted you've decided to embark on this tranquil journey through time with me, exploring the captivating pastimes and entertainment of the medieval era. Wherever you are right now, be it morning, afternoon, evening, or the witching hour, settle in comfortably and let go of the day's worries as you allow my words to paint vivid images in your mind. Take a moment to relax, breathe deeply, and imagine the world as it was long ago, a time of kings, castles, and curious traditions. I would love to hear from you. Where in this vast world are you tuning in from? What time of day is it in your corner of the globe? If you're enjoying this soothing, quirky storytelling that brings history to life, please do subscribe so you won't miss any of our calming sojourns into the past. But for now, let go of all that. Your only task is to unwind and let me transport you to an age long gone. A time of knights, peasants, plagues, and chivalry, the Middle Ages. When we think of this period, the images that come to mind are often those of struggle and hardship. And indeed, life was no picnic for the vast majority during the medieval era, which stretched from the 5th to the 15th century. It was a time dominated by a feudal system, where a small noble class reigned over a large peasant population. For many, each day was a battle for survival, whether working the fields or learning a trade. Yet, despite the hardships of war, disease, and endless labor, the human spirit endured. Just as we do today, medieval people sought ways to cope with their lives, finding moments of escape and joy, no matter how fleeting. Some of their distractions may feel familiar to us, while others were so bizarre or dangerous that they might seem almost surreal. So let us leave our modern world behind for a moment and explore how the lords and ladies, knights and peasants, jesters and maidens sought fun amid their struggles. Our journey will take us to grand tournament fields, rowdy banquet halls, misty forests, and muddy fairgrounds. The medieval tournament was one of the grandest and most iconic forms of entertainment. These events were not just competitions. They were dazzling spectacles where knights displayed their martial prowess, competed for glory, and earned the favor of noble ladies. For the common folk, they provided a burst of color and excitement, a break from the hardships of daily life. Imagine the scene. Vast fields outside town, buzzing with energy, lined with rows of colorful tents and pavilions that house the competing knights and their entourages. Banners and flags flutter in the breeze, while vendors offer refreshments and souvenirs. The atmosphere crackles with anticipation, the air filled with the sounds of people, horses, and the clanking of armor. The knights, the stars of the show, are the medieval equivalent of today's professional athletes and celebrities. Clad in shining armor and draped in colorful silks, they create a dazzling spectacle as they ride their powerful war horses around the arena. And there was one knight who stood above them all, a legend both in tournament prowess and renown. His name was William Marshall. His story could have come straight from the pages of a fairy tale. Born the youngest son of a minor noble in 1146, Marshall was seen as little more than an extra mouth to feed. So, like many surplus sons in medieval times, his father essentially sent him to the church as an oblate. But Marshall was anything but cut out for a life of prayer and contemplation. As a young man, he preferred brawling to quiet reflection. Luckily for him, his talents were noticed by a powerful nobleman who decided to train him as a knight. This decision proved to be a stroke of fate. Marshall excelled in the art of knighthood, but what truly made him famous was his audacious presence on the tournament circuit. At a time when nobles could be ransomed if they were captured in battle, the rewards offered by tournaments became an attractive alternative. And William Marshall, he was exceptional at winning them. For the most skilled and cunning knights, the risks were worth the potential rewards of ransom money. William Marshall's victories in the tournament circuit were the stuff of legend, with contemporary sources claiming that he won an astonishing 500 jousts. While that number may seem somewhat exaggerated, the sheer volume of his successes is indisputable. Marshall's name became synonymous with triumph, and his presence on the tournament field was an event in itself. Imagine the excitement that would swell in the crowd as the knights, clad in their shining armor and displaying their family crests, galloped toward one another in the grand tournament arenas. And among them, standing tall and unwavering, was William Marshall, an embodiment of skill, chivalry, and honor. He wasn't just another knight. He was the hero of the medieval age, the epitome of martial excellence and integrity. Marshall's success on the tournament field didn't just make him a popular figure among the common folk. It also earned him the favor and admiration of the nobility. He wasn't merely a warrior. He was a symbol of the virtues that the medieval nobility so highly valued: courage, skill, and loyalty. This admiration led to an increase in his influence within the royal courts of England, where his reputation as a skilled and honorable knight opened doors to positions of power and prestige. His prowess on the jousting field quickly translated to opportunities in the royal courts. As he became increasingly well known, Marshall caught the attention of some of the most powerful figures in England. His loyalty and courage were virtues that made him not just a knight, but also a trusted advisor and confidant to the kings of England. He became the right-hand man to no less than 5 English monarchs, including the legendary Richard the Lionheart and his brother, King John. These were turbulent times in England, filled with political intrigue, war, and rebellion. and Marshall was right in the thick of it, using his skills as a strategist and his reputation as a man of honor to influence the course of history. But despite his growing political influence and wealth, Marshall never lost sight of his true passion, the tournament. For him, the joust was not merely a means to an end, but a way to test his skill, prove his bravery, and earn the admiration of both his peers and the common people. His victories in these tournaments became more than just a display of physical strength. They were a demonstration of his character. A knight's honor was everything in the medieval world, and William Marshall exemplified this ideal to the fullest. His skill with a lance was unmatched, his ability to remain calm under pressure legendary. He had a remarkable ability to read the field, anticipate his opponent's moves, and strike with precision, qualities that made him not just a competitor, but a true master of the joust. While the joust was the most prominent feature of these tournaments, they were not without their dangers. These events, though celebrated by the people, were far from the clean, safe competitions we might imagine today. Early medieval tournaments were chaotic and often violent affairs, where knights clashed not only to prove their skill, but to capture one another for ransom. It wasn't just about the glory or the fame, it was about securing financial gain. Ransoms could reach exorbitant sums, and as a knight, being captured during a battle or a tournament could result in a significant loss of wealth and prestige, unless, of course, you were skilled enough to avoid such a fate. The violence in these tournaments led to attempts at regulation. The Vatican, horrified by the bloodshed, tried to ban the tournaments altogether, deeming them reckless and dangerous. However, these papal decrees were largely ignored by the nobility, and tournaments continued to flourish, albeit with some modifications to limit the worst excesses of violence. The joust, for example, became the central event of the tournament, offering a more controlled environment for knights to demonstrate their skills without descending into the chaos of a full-on battle. Still, even in the joust, injuries were common, and knights often risked serious harm. Despite the danger, the rewards were considerable. The wealth gained from tournament victories, the prestige earned, and the potential for political advancement made it all worthwhile for knights like William Marshall. And Marshall, ever the consummate professional, took full advantage of these opportunities. He became a symbol of the tournament itself, a knight who had mastered the art of jousting and who embodied all that was revered in medieval chivalry. His legacy, both as a warrior and as a statesman, would endure long after his time on the tournament circuit had ended. But tournaments weren't just about individual glory. They were also about political power. A successful tournament could elevate a noble's reputation, strengthen alliances, and intimidate rivals. They were a stage for power plays, a way to showcase one's strength and influence in a highly public setting. William Marshall, with his unparalleled skill and unshakable integrity, became a key player in this larger game of medieval politics. The joust itself was a spectacle like no other, a dangerous yet exhilarating display of martial prowess. The knights would charge at one another, lances lowered, and with a tremendous clash, they would collide in the middle of the field. The sound of splintering wood, the crash of armor against armor, the roar of the crowd. It was a dramatic, electrifying event that brought the excitement of battle to the people without the devastating consequences. Yet even in this controlled environment, the risk of injury was real. Marshall himself was said to have once been pierced through the thigh by a lance during a joust, a testament to the dangerous nature of these competitions. But for a knight like him, the risks were always worth it. Victory in the tournament meant more than just wealth and fame, it meant honor. And in the medieval world, there was nothing more valuable than a knight's honor. To fully grasp the allure of medieval tournaments, let us zoom in on one particularly famous and perhaps infamous event that took place in 1274. The setting was the northern French region of Champagne, where the key players were none other than the brash English prince, Edward, who would later become King Edward III, and the Count of Champagne, a French nobleman. This tournament was destined to become more than just a display of martial prowess. It quickly escalated into a diplomatic spectacle that would sour relations between England and France for years to come. Edward, already a figure of renown, arrived at the tournament with a retinue of 200 knights. This impressive show of strength was seen by the French as an act of arrogance. After all, in their own territory, the French nobles typically ruled the roost. The Count of Champagne, a proud man, took particular offense to what he perceived as a calculated snub. What was intended as a friendly competition had now become a battle for honor, and tensions were running high. As the tournament unfolded, things took a dramatic turn. In a joust between Edward's knight and the Count's son, Edward's side emerged victorious, which only further fueled the Count's ire. The crowd, perhaps expecting a more restrained affair, watched in shock as the Count charged at Prince Edward himself, lance lowered in a moment of utter defiance. This, however, was a serious miscalculation on the Count's part. Edward, quick on his feet and ever the warrior, easily dodged the Count's strike. In a swift move, he seized the Count, throwing him off his horse and into the mud. According to one witness, Edward then struck him between the shoulders with such force that the sound of the blow could be heard by those standing far off. Imagine the scene, a royal confrontation in front of a cheering crowd, an explosive moment of both physical skill and sheer bravado that would be talked about for generations. The Count, humiliated in front of thousands, withdrew in disgrace, while Edward basked in the applause of the crowd. This moment, however, was more than just a dramatic altercation. It was a stark reminder of the intense rivalries and political games that often underpinned these tournaments. A simple joust between knights had morphed into a clash of national pride and power. Edward's boldness in the face of insult was a sign of the fierce competition that existed not just on the field, but also in the courts of Europe. Of course, once the dust settled, there were still political ramifications to deal with. Edward's actions, though impressive in the eyes of his supporters, were seen as deeply insulting to the French nobility. The French king, who happened to be the uncle of both Edward and the Count of Champagne, was not amused by the spectacle. A diplomatic crisis was at hand, and it took some delicate negotiations to smooth over the ruffled feathers and preserve the fragile peace between the two nations. This episode, however, underscored a fundamental truth about medieval tournaments. They were never just about the competition. They were deeply intertwined with the political and social dynamics of the time, offering a platform for nobles to assert their power, settle old scores, and showcase their influence. The dramatic confrontation at this tournament was not an isolated incident. It was just one example of how these events could blur the lines between sport and politics, between personal ambition and national pride. Tournaments, in their most intense and competitive forms, were not merely a contest of skill and strength. They were a stage where power plays were made, where alliances were tested, and where the stakes could be just as high as any battlefield. As thrilling as these tournaments were, they were also a reminder of the violent, turbulent world in which they took place. The drama that unfolded on the tournament grounds was often a microcosm of the broader conflicts and rivalries that defined medieval Europe. From the jousting pits to the royal courts, the pursuit of glory and honor was inextricably linked with the quest for power. And in this world, no knight could afford to lose. Now that we've seen the grandeur and drama of the tournament, let's shift gears and dive into one of the more unusual aspects of medieval entertainment: hunting. But this wasn't just any ordinary hunting. This was the domain of the elite, where lords and ladies took to the forests in pursuit of wild game, not only for sustenance, but also as a way to display their power, status, and, perhaps most importantly, their control over nature. To hunt in medieval times was a symbol of masculinity, strength, and mastery over the natural world, a form of recreation that was deeply entwined with both politics and personal identity. At the heart of the noble hunt was the noble hunting dog, a creature so revered that its presence was as essential to the hunt as the hunter himself. The dogs, trained to perfection, ranged from swift greyhounds to sturdy hounds, bred to track and chase down larger prey like boars or deer. The hunt began long before the dogs were unleashed. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual that involved skilled keepers of the forest who would track the quarry, looking for telltale signs like paw prints and scat. It was said that the best huntsman had an almost mystical connection with the land and the animals within it, able to read the forest and predict where the game would be. The hunt itself was a grand affair, with nobles riding out on horseback, their hounds at the ready, and the air filled with the sound of horns and barking dogs. It wasn't just about capturing the prey, it was about showing off one's hunting prowess, and perhaps, even more importantly, flaunting one's wealth and access to such an extravagant pastime. For the noble classes, hunting was not simply a means of putting food on the table, it was an event. The hunt was a chance to prove strength and courage, to demonstrate dominion over the land, and to bond with one's peers in a communal display of power. The ritual of the hunt was also a showcase of the hierarchy that defined medieval society. The best hunters, the lords and ladies, rode in front, often at the head of a large entourage. Their attendants, peasants, and lesser nobles trailed behind, holding back the dogs or performing various duties. But it was the noble hunters who were the true stars of the show. The success of the hunt reflected directly on their status. If a lord bagged a large stag or boar, it wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a public declaration of his prowess and power, a moment to impress others and solidify his position in the social order. However, as with many of these grand entertainments, the hunt was not just a noble pursuit. Even the dogs, those loyal companions, had their own place in the ritual. They were well fed and well treated, for their role was integral to the hunt's success. And after the hunt, the dogs were rewarded with the heart and entrails of the slain beast, a treat that was almost as coveted as the hunt itself. It was a display of the symbiotic relationship between the nobles and their dogs, who were as much a part of the spectacle as the hunters themselves. But not all hunts were about the thrill of the chase. The nobility also participated in the ancient art of falconry, a practice that combined skill, patience, and, of course, wealth. Falconry was a hobby that required a noble's full attention and dedication. It wasn't something anyone could do. It was an elite pastime that involved capturing and training birds of prey. These birds, often hawks or falcons, were trained to hunt for their masters, capturing small game like rabbits or pheasants in mid-flight. For many nobles, falconry became the ultimate status symbol, a way to demonstrate their wealth and refinement. The more rare and powerful the bird, the more impressive the falconer. Some noble families even kept entire aviaries filled with birds of prey, each one more exotic and expensive than the last. The gerfalcon, for example, was a majestic white bird that could reach speeds of up to 130 mph. To possess such a bird was to declare oneself as part of the aristocracy, someone with the means to partake in such an expensive, demanding, and prestigious hobby. But falconry was more than just a status symbol. It was also a skill that required intense training and dedication. A falconer had to learn the language of the bird, how to read its moods, how to handle it with care, and most importantly, how to release it at just the right moment to catch its prey. It was a deeply personal bond between the falconer and his bird, one built on trust and mutual understanding. The falconer's success was determined by how well he could communicate with his bird, how well they could work together to bring down the game. The art of falconry, revered and practiced by the nobility, was not confined to Europe alone. In fact, falconry has ancient roots that stretch across the globe, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of the Middle East. It was a pastime that transcended borders, favored by kings, queens, and conquerors alike. The Mongols, led by the legendary Genghis Khan, were particularly renowned for their mastery of falconry. Genghis himself was said to have had a flock of birds that he used in battle, even training them to hunt enemy soldiers during their campaigns. For the Mongols, falconry was not merely a sport or pastime. It was an essential tool of war. They used their birds to scout enemy positions and carry messages between their far-flung armies, a feathered communication network long before the advent of modern technology. Imagine the fear instilled in enemy forces as they looked up to see falcons swooping down, carrying messages or delivering deadly strikes. The Mongols' use of falconry on the battlefield demonstrates just how deeply intertwined this skill was with both warfare and nobility. But the Mongols were not the only ones to recognize the value of these birds of prey. In the Islamic world, falconry was similarly esteemed, often depicted in art, poetry, and literature as a symbol of nobility and grace. Islamic rulers kept elaborate falconry estates, with hundreds of birds under the care of skilled falconers. The birds themselves were not just valued for their hunting prowess, but also for their exotic beauty. The gur falcon, prized by European nobility, was equally adored in the Middle East. These falcons, rare and swift, were the Lamborghini of the bird world, and owning one was a clear sign of a ruler's wealth and status. In the medieval courts of Europe, falconry was often used as a form of social currency. The nobleman with the finest bird was a man of great wealth, his falcon a symbol of his power and prestige. The finer the bird, the greater the nobility of the owner. And yet, falconry wasn't just about flashy displays of wealth. It was also a deeply personal and spiritual pursuit. Falconers often spoke of the bond between bird and handler, describing the almost mystical connection they shared. A falcon was not a mere tool for hunting. It was a partner in the chase, an extension of the falconer's own spirit. One such noblewoman who became famous for her passion for falconry was Mary of Burgundy, the daughter of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. Mary was an avid falconer, one of the few women of her time who truly embraced the art. She loved her birds with a fierce devotion and was often seen riding through the countryside, falcon perched on her arm, in search of prey. Mary's passion for falconry was so well known that she even had a custom saddle made for her horse, complete with a perch for her falcon, ensuring that she could always be ready for a hunt. Her love of the birds was evident in the way she cared for them, often spending hours training and nurturing them. However, as with many noble pursuits, Mary's love of falconry would lead to tragedy. In 1482, at the age of just 25, Mary was out hawking with her ladies-in-waiting when disaster struck. Her horse stumbled, and Mary was thrown violently to the ground, injuring her back severely. Though she was rushed to her chambers, the injury proved fatal, and Mary died just a few days later. Her death plunged the Duchy of Burgundy into a succession crisis, and her passing marked the end of an era of opulence and chivalry. Her tragic end was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, even for the most powerful and beloved figures. In the years that followed, Mary's legacy lived on in the memories of those who knew her. She became a symbol of the strength and grace of medieval noblewomen, a figure who defied convention and embraced the untamed spirit of the hunt. But her death also highlighted the dangers that came with such a physically demanding and high-risk activity. For all the beauty and elegance of falconry, it was, at its heart, a dangerous and unpredictable pursuit. As we reflect on the extraordinary art of falconry, we must also acknowledge the way it mirrored the grander trends of medieval society, an era where the elite were constantly seeking ways to distinguish themselves, to assert their dominance, and to indulge in the most exclusive pleasures available. And what better way to demonstrate one's superiority than by participating in activities that were not only symbols of wealth and status, but also of mastery over the forces of nature itself? Yet, as the nobility reveled in their extravagant pursuits, life for the common folk was far more humble, and their entertainment much more modest. While lords and ladies hunted in forests and trained birds of prey, peasants found their joy in simpler pleasures. For the vast majority of medieval people, pastimes were not grand spectacles, but small moments of respite from the grueling toil of everyday life. Yet even in their simpler joys, the people of the Middle Ages displayed a remarkable resilience, finding laughter and light even in the harshest of times. One of the most beloved and enduring forms of entertainment for the common folk was the village festival. These festivals, often tied to religious observances or the changing seasons, were times of celebration, when people could temporarily forget their hardships and indulge in merriment. They were occasions for feasting, dancing, and socializing, events where the ordinary people of medieval society could come together, share in a communal experience, and revel in the warmth of shared joy. For the commoners, life was often a struggle for survival. The medieval peasant worked long hours in the fields, toiling in the soil to feed not only their families, but the entire nation. The harsh realities of famine, disease, and poverty were ever present, and the specter of death loomed large over the lives of the poor. Yet, despite these challenges, the village festivals provided a temporary escape, a chance to laugh, to dance, to indulge in food and drink, and to forget, if only for a few days, the weight of the world. One of the most eagerly anticipated festivals in many villages was the carnival, the period of indulgence that came just before the austere fasting of Lent. Carnival was a time when the usual social hierarchies were turned upside down. The poor, who spent most of the year toiling in fields and homes, were given a brief respite to indulge in revelry, to dress in costumes, and to engage in mischief and play. It was a time of chaos and fun, a time when the rules of society seemed to loosen, and anything seemed possible. The festivities were often marked by wild and exuberant parades, filled with music, dancing, and merriment. People donned masks, took on new identities, and played pranks on one another. The Lord of Misrule, a mock ruler chosen for the occasion, was a key figure in the carnival celebrations. This figure, often a peasant or an outsider, was given authority for the duration of the festival to dictate the rules of the revelry. The Lord of Misrule would lead the procession of costumed revelers, organizing the festivities and making sure that everyone participated in the wild and unruly spirit of the carnival. It was a time for people to step outside of their usual roles, to engage in fun and mischief without fear of punishment or reprisal. The carnival was not just about fun. It was also a social release, a way for the common folk to momentarily flip the social order on its head. For a few days, the peasants could mock the nobility, make light of the church, and indulge in behaviors that were normally frowned upon. This inversion of social norms gave the common people a sense of agency, allowing them to momentarily escape the rigid structure of medieval society and have a taste of what it felt like to be free. While the nobles and royals enjoyed their lavish hunts and extravagant feasts, the common people found their own ways to indulge in smaller pleasures. And in a world where life could be harsh, where disease and death were constant threats, these moments of joy, however fleeting, were vital to the well-being of the people. The festivals, the music, the laughter, they were essential to the human spirit, offering an escape from the drudgery of daily life, and a reminder that, even in the darkest times, joy could still be found. While the festivals, fairs, and tournaments provided brief but cherished moments of joy for both the nobility and common folk, it's important to remember that not all medieval diversions were as festive or lighthearted. In fact, some of the most popular forms of entertainment during the Middle Ages were steeped in darkness, superstition, and even danger. The medieval world was one in which life was often brutal, unpredictable, and short. And in such an environment, people sought out entertainment that reflected the harsh realities of their time. One such entertainment was the gruesome and macabre spectacle of public executions. These events, though disturbing to us today, were considered a form of entertainment in the medieval period, drawing large crowds who gathered to watch the gruesome proceedings. In an era where death and suffering were commonplace, particularly due to disease, war, and famine, public executions became a form of catharsis, a way for people to confront the darker side of life, albeit from a safe distance. The condemned were often criminals or political prisoners, and their executions were carried out in the town square or at a public venue, where they were displayed as both punishment and spectacle. The most common forms of execution included hanging, beheading, and, for the particularly heinous offenders, burning at the stake. These events were often preceded by a lengthy procession, where the condemned would be paraded through the streets in a cart, often with a crowd of jeering onlookers following behind. The spectacle of a public execution was an opportunity for people to come together and witness justice being served. But it was also an opportunity to experience a sense of shared moral superiority as they watched someone else pay the ultimate price for their misdeeds. But these executions weren't just about punishment. They were also about reinforcing the power and authority of the ruling class. The kings, queens, and nobles who controlled these spectacles used them as a way to remind the populace of their authority, to show that they were the ones who held the power of life and death over their subjects. Public executions were a reminder that, in the medieval world, the rulers could impose their will upon anyone, regardless of their status or station in life. Despite the brutality of such spectacles, they were an essential part of medieval culture, especially in the towns and cities. People would often gather in large crowds, not only to watch the executions, but also to engage in a sort of collective ritual. For many, it was an opportunity to see justice being done, to feel a sense of relief that the criminal had been punished, and to experience a temporary release from the fear and uncertainty that gripped daily life. The spectacle of execution also had a dark, voyeuristic appeal, as people were drawn to the raw human drama of life and death, a form of entertainment that would be unrecognizable to us today. Yet, even in these dark moments, there was an element of ritual. The condemned were often given a chance to confess their sins before the execution, and many were offered the opportunity for a final meal. These rituals, while morbid, provided a sense of closure for both the criminal and the crowd. It was a way of bringing order to the chaos of medieval life, of asserting that even in the face of death, there was still a framework of justice and morality. Though we may find these spectacles unsettling, they were deeply ingrained in the social and cultural fabric of the medieval world. They were, in many ways, a reflection of the harshness of the times, where violence and death were ever present, and where entertainment, for better or worse, was sometimes derived from the darkest aspects of human existence. As unsettling as public executions were, they were not the only form of dark entertainment enjoyed by medieval crowds. Another gruesome pastime that captivated the public imagination was the infamous medieval ordeal. These trials were based on the belief that divine intervention would protect the innocent and punish the guilty, and they often involved physically painful or dangerous tests. Ordeals were used to determine guilt or innocence in situations where there was no clear evidence or reliable testimony. They were, in essence, a form of trial by ordeal, a spectacle in itself that could often be more terrifying than the crime it was meant to judge. One of the most infamous medieval ordeals was the trial by fire. In this ordeal, the accused was forced to walk across a bed of burning coals or even pick up a red-hot iron. If the accused emerged from the ordeal without injury, they were deemed innocent, while any burns or injuries were seen as proof of guilt. In theory, divine intervention would protect the innocent, but the reality was far more brutal. Walking barefoot across burning coals or handling red-hot metal was a dangerous, often deadly act, and many who underwent this trial perished in the attempt. The logic behind this gruesome ordeal was that God would protect the innocent, but the test itself was a terrifying demonstration of the medieval belief in fate, divine judgment, and the power of the church to control the lives and destinies of the common people. Another form of ordeal was the trial by water, which involved either submerging the accused in water or forcing them to plunge into a river. In some cases, the accused would be tied up and thrown into a body of water, with the belief that if they sank, they were innocent, but if they floated, they were guilty of the crime. This bizarre test was rooted in the belief that water, as a pure element, would cleanse the guilty, allowing them to sink, while the innocent would remain buoyant. Of course, the trial often ended in tragedy, as the accused would be drowned if they were unable to swim or if they did not sink immediately. While these ordeals were meant to test the accused's fate, they were, in fact, a grim and terrifying form of punishment, often resulting in death or serious injury regardless of guilt or innocence. For the medieval public, these ordeals were another form of entertainment. The crowds would gather to witness these trials, watching with bated breath as the accused either survived or perished in the attempt. The spectacle of human suffering and divine judgment fascinated medieval audiences, who viewed these ordeals as a way for the divine to reveal the truth, to sort the righteous from the guilty. It was a form of religious theater, one where the audience could watch, judge, and perhaps even participate in the performance of justice. It may seem unfathomable to us today, but in the medieval mind, these trials were seen as a necessary part of the pursuit of truth and justice. Even though the trial by ordeal was eventually abolished in many parts of Europe, it remained a part of the medieval psyche for centuries. The practice began to fade with the rise of more rational legal systems, but the idea of divine intervention in human affairs, of the power of fate, destiny, and judgment, remained central to the medieval worldview. The medieval obsession with proving innocence or guilt through such extreme measures serves as a chilling reminder of how deeply intertwined religion, justice, and entertainment were in the lives of ordinary people. Despite the brutality of such ordeals, they also provided a strange sense of closure. In a world filled with uncertainty, where truth was often elusive and justice could be corrupted by wealth or power, these trials offered a form of resolution. They gave the people a way to understand and cope with the randomness of life and death, to feel that, in the end, there was a divine order to the chaos. The crowds that gathered to watch these trials were not just passive observers. They were active participants in a culture that sought justice, even at the cost of suffering. While many medieval entertainments were steeped in violence, superstition, and grim ritual, there were also moments of levity and escape that didn't involve the brutal spectacles of public punishment or the harsh realities of medieval life. Among the more whimsical and lighthearted pastimes enjoyed by the people of the Middle Ages were the pageants, plays, and performances that offered both amusement and spiritual reflection. These performances, often linked to religious festivals and important feasts, provided a much-needed escape from the hardships of life, as they filled the streets with laughter, music, and stories. The medieval mystery plays, which were performed in town squares or church courtyards, were a particularly popular form of entertainment. These plays depicted biblical stories, from the creation to the Last Judgment, with elaborate sets, costumes, and performances. While they had religious themes, they also offered a kind of spectacle that appealed to the common folk. The actors, often members of the community, would wear elaborate costumes and masks to bring the Bible stories to life, creating a visual and auditory experience that captivated the audience. These performances weren't just about religious devotion. They were an event that brought the entire community together. The plays allowed people to immerse themselves in stories that were both familiar and mystical, and they were often filled with humor, excitement, and action, making them accessible to all, from the clergy to the peasants. These performances were often performed during important religious festivals, such as Christmas and Easter, when towns and villages would hold grand feasts and processions to mark the occasion. The plays were a form of communal celebration, a way for people to express their devotion while also enjoying the theater. Despite their religious themes, the plays were a reflection of the medieval love for spectacle and drama. In many ways, they resembled the modern-day theater, with actors performing in front of an eager audience, using props, costumes, and music to tell their story. The difference, of course, was that the plays often had moral or religious lessons at their core, emphasizing the power of God, the triumph of good over evil, and the need for repentance and redemption. The mystery plays were not the only performances to capture the medieval imagination. Another popular form of entertainment was the courtly love poetry, recited by minstrels, troubadours, and bards at banquets and feasts. These performers would sing of chivalric love, heroic deeds, and the ideals of knighthood, providing both entertainment and inspiration to their noble audiences. The poets and musicians would often perform in the presence of royalty, nobility, and knights, who would listen intently to the verses, appreciating not only the beauty of the poetry, but also the values it represented. Courtly love was a concept that transcended mere romance. It was about the nobility's adherence to a strict code of conduct, chivalric virtues that governed their actions, and their unwavering loyalty to their lords and ladies. While courtly love poetry may seem quaint to us now, it played a crucial role in shaping the medieval aristocracy's worldview. The poetry and songs elevated the knight's sense of purpose and honor, and they were seen as an important form of moral instruction. These performances were an expression of the ideals of knighthood and chivalry, and they were often used to promote the virtues of loyalty, courage, and devotion to one's lady or lord. For the knights, the love poems were more than just entertainment. They were a reminder of their duty to uphold the ideals of their class and to maintain their honor on and off the battlefield. While the knights reveled in the grandiose tales of courtly love, the common folk found their own entertainment in the simple pleasures of music, dance, and song. The medieval villages would often hold lively dances where men and women would gather to celebrate the changing of the seasons or to mark important occasions. These dances, sometimes accompanied by simple instruments like flutes, fiddles, and drums, were a joyful escape from the laborious routine of daily life. For the peasants, the dances were not just a form of entertainment. They were a way to connect with each other, to build community, and to share in the shared experience of life. Music, too, was a major part of medieval celebrations, and songs about love, nature, and the triumphs and tragedies of life were common at both high and low feasts. While music, poetry, and pageants brought joy and a sense of community, medieval people also sought entertainment in other forms of competition and sport, activities that allowed them to display their physical prowess and challenge their peers in friendly rivalry. These pastimes, although less grandiose than tournaments or royal hunts, still played an important role in the lives of both nobles and commoners. For the peasants, these games were a rare opportunity to break from the mundane and enjoy a sense of camaraderie and fun. While for the nobility, these competitions were a way to demonstrate their superior physical abilities and reinforce their social standing. One of the most common sports enjoyed by medieval people was archery. Whether practiced by the nobles or the common folk, archery was seen as both a practical skill and a competitive sport. For the nobles, it was a way to hone their skills for hunting and warfare, while for the peasants, it was often a way to participate in public competitions and festivals. Archery contests were a popular form of entertainment, and towns and villages would frequently hold archery tournaments during important festivals or gatherings. The tension in the air was palpable as competitors lined up to take their shots, each one hoping to hit the target with deadly precision. The winner would often receive a prize, such as a sum of money, a fine piece of cloth, or even a large feast, depending on the importance of the event. But archery wasn't just about skill, it was also about honor. In many cases, a knight or noble would challenge another to a public archery contest to prove who was the better marksman. These competitions could be highly charged, with both parties vying for supremacy in front of a cheering crowd. The victor was not only celebrated for his skill with the bow, but also for his ability to maintain composure and dignity in the face of competition. For the nobility, these contests were an extension of their social hierarchy, a way to reinforce their status and show their superiority over others. While archery was a widespread pastime, it wasn't the only competition that medieval people enjoyed. Another popular game, particularly among the peasantry, was the ancient sport of cudgeling. Cudgeling was a brutal, almost gladiatorial contest in which two participants would face off, armed with wooden sticks, and attempt to knock each other down. While the rules were simple, each participant took turns striking the other with their cudgel. This game often resulted in serious injuries, and sometimes even death. Despite the inherent danger, cudgeling remained a beloved sport, especially in rural areas, where it was seen as both a form of entertainment and a way to build strength and camaraderie among the local population. The popularity of cudgeling illustrates a key aspect of medieval life: the fascination with violence, even in the realm of recreation. While it may seem unthinkable by today's standards, The medieval mindset saw physical confrontation as a natural part of life, something that was woven into the fabric of society. People were accustomed to violence, not just in the form of war and crime, but in their everyday pastimes as well. Whether it was through the bloodied fields of tournaments, the violent games of cudgeling, or the bloody spectacles of public executions, medieval people were accustomed to experiencing violence in both public and private spheres. Despite the violent nature of some of these sports, they were also an opportunity for the people to come together, to share in a communal experience, and to bond over a common interest. Whether through archery, cudgeling, or other games, these competitions were often communal affairs, where people gathered to watch, cheer, and participate. For the peasants, they provided a break from the grind of daily life, a chance to indulge in something exciting and unpredictable. For the nobles, they were a way to reinforce their power, status, and physical superiority. Either way, these games and competitions offered a release from the mundane, and a way for people to connect with one another in a world that could often be harsh, uncertain, and unforgiving. While physical sports like archery and cudgeling offered a rough form of entertainment, another important aspect of medieval pastimes was the art of storytelling. In an age before television, books, or widespread literacy, the spoken word was one of the most powerful tools for both entertainment and education. The medieval world was filled with bards, minstrels, and storytellers who traveled from village to village, sharing tales of heroism, tragedy, and adventure. These performers were often seen as the keepers of history, passing down stories of past events, legends, and moral lessons through song and speech. The most famous of these storytellers were the troubadours, poets, and minstrels who flourished in the courts of the nobility. These performers were highly regarded for their ability to weave intricate tales, often about the lives and exploits of knights, kings, and queens. Their songs were filled with chivalric ideals, celebrating the virtues of loyalty, bravery, and honor, and were meant to inspire both the nobility and the common folk. At grand feasts and courtly gatherings, minstrels would recite these tales, often accompanied by the sound of a lute or harp, while guests listened in rapt attention. The stories were designed not only to entertain, but also to reinforce the values of the medieval aristocracy, creating a shared sense of identity and purpose among the elite. For the common folk, storytelling was also an essential part of their cultural life. While they may not have had access to the grand feasts or elaborate performances enjoyed by the nobility, they had their own traditions of oral storytelling. These stories, often passed down through generations, were filled with folklore, legends, and moral lessons. The stories were usually told around the hearth, in the warmth of the home, after a long day's work. These tales often featured heroic figures, supernatural creatures, and magical events, and were designed to entertain, educate, and provide comfort in a harsh world. For the peasants, storytelling was a way to preserve their culture, to pass on traditions and beliefs, and to provide a sense of hope and resilience. The themes of these stories often mirrored the struggles of everyday life. Many of the tales were about ordinary people overcoming great odds, whether it was battling dragons, outwitting evil sorcerers, or triumphing over injustice. These stories provided a sense of escape from the difficult realities of medieval life, offering the peasants a way to dream of a better world where good triumphed over evil and the underdog could emerge victorious. The stories also helped to reinforce societal norms and values, teaching lessons about morality, courage, and justice. They were not just a form of entertainment, but also a way of imparting wisdom and guidance to the next generation. The medieval fascination with storytelling also extended to the realm of the written word, particularly with the rise of manuscripts and illuminated texts. While literacy rates were low among the general population, the educated elite, including monks and clergy, would often commission beautifully illustrated manuscripts that contained both religious texts and secular stories. These manuscripts were painstakingly created by hand, often featuring intricate designs, bright colors, and illustrations that brought the stories to life. For the nobility, owning such a manuscript was a sign of wealth, education, and sophistication. The most famous examples of these illuminated texts were the Bible and religious manuscripts, which were treasured not only for their religious significance, but also for their artistic beauty. For the common folk, however, books were rare and expensive, and storytelling often remained an oral tradition. In some cases, traveling storytellers and minstrels would perform epic tales from these illuminated manuscripts, bringing to life the heroic stories contained within. These performances were sometimes accompanied by dramatic gestures, music, and even props, turning the telling of a story into an immersive experience. Whether in the noble courts or the humble homes of peasants, storytelling was a vital part of medieval culture, connecting people to their past, their beliefs, and each other.